Here at the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management, located at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, we meet the needs of the upwardly mobile professionals. Our business school functions in an evolving global space where the need to have that competitive edge distinguishes you as a professional. Our academic curriculum offers a variety of programs that gives you that edge. We offer our students a doctorate in business administration. Then, there's our executive masters in business administration. Our Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management is for you. Enroll now.
Welcome to Friday webinars at the Business School, UWI Cave Hill. My name is Marjorie Wharton, and I'm the Strategic Business Services Director and Clinical Faculty with the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. And I'm your host for this event. Our format today is going to be a little different. We are having a moderated panel discussion, which I will start by introducing your moderator, and he will then go on to introduce the panelists who will be sharing their perspectives and insights with us today. Our topic today is digital economies, strategies for pivoting businesses. This webinar is scheduled to run for an hour and 15 minutes. And as the discussion progresses, please feel free as usual to ask your questions. On your screens, you will find the control panel, which will give you an option labeled Q&A, and you may use that at any point during the webinar to submit your questions to us. You can also feel free to use the chat feature. As we go along, our moderator and panelists will select and respond to as many of the questions as they can. Now let me introduce your moderator. Roland Haggins is the executive in residence at the UWI Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management. Roland has over 15 years of global finance and technology industry expertise and has been invited to speak by various governments, including the governments of India, Uganda, regional central banks, and global organizations, including the International Monetary Fund, the Commonwealth Telecommunications Union, the United Nations International Telecommunications Union, and the International Labour Organization. A leading digital economy specialist, Roland has expertise in finance and technology, strategic planning, business development, operations, and the global regulatory environment. He has also used his knowledge of the financial system to develop, coordinate, and lecture banking and finance courses for the University of the West Indies Open Campus, including ethics in banking and finance. Roland holds a bachelor's degree with the first class honors in economics and banking from the University of Greenwich, and a master's of science degree with distinction in economics, finance, and investment from Queen Mary University of London. Welcome to you, Roland Haggins.
Thank you so much, Marjorie, and welcome everyone to the call. Thank you. So we have people joining from all over the world today. I know that there's going to be some people joining from Africa, from all over the region in the Caribbean, maybe from the United States and the UK as well. And we've gone through a very challenging time. Businesses have suffered during this pandemic, and also individuals, families, and so forth. So there's a very lovely initiative that's taking place, and it's coming out of Africa. It's called the Ubuntu Challenge, Love Challenge, the Ubuntu Love Challenge. And you can check that out at ubuntulovechallenge.org. It's Mamadou Touré who's spearheading this. And there's been lots of acts of kindness that have taken place, and we'd like to keep these in mind. And also, all the business people on this call, we'd like you to keep in mind those that are less fortunate as well. But we're going to be talking about not only how we can pivot businesses, but how individuals can pivot, and governments and so forth, and what we can do as economies and countries and individuals to help with this digital transformation that we need. So we've got some amazing panelists today, some extremely intelligent people and vibrant talent. Their bios are very long, and I'm not going to read every single piece of the bio, but I know them very well, so I'll do a little synopsis. Shivonne Johnson is a very, very powerful young lady, a very intelligent young lady. She studied at Harvard. She has an MBA from Harvard, and so many degrees. I don't want to list them, but she also has a master's from George Washington University. She's multifaceted and multidisciplinary, from project management to producing television and movies. She's worked with the Disney Channel, the Royal Household, National Geographic. She's consulted to a number of governments in the region, including the Barbados government, St. Bart's, Anguilla, Bahamas, and she's been a strategic consultant for 2 luxury French brands, sports brands. She's also a fitness expert. So Shivonne Johnson is currently working with the IDB and consulting with them. And she has a lot of information that can benefit us. We've got Mykel Douglas, who is the CTO of the Gold Cube, which has, it's an Intel investment business. It's powered by Intel. This is a very unique business that has a special technology for gold ATMs, and they utilize cryptocurrencies as well. And this is something that's going to be potentially rolled out across Africa. Mykel comes from a long line of technologists. His uncle used to work for Intel here in Barbados. So did his mother. And you know, he studied at FIT. And prior to that, he was studying electrical and mechanical engineering here in Barbados. So Mykel has spearheaded a number of leading technologies. He was one of the first people to push video streaming. He did that from the US. So Mykel is another very powerful person that we have on this discussion that can assist us with this digital economy. Tara Frater is an attorney at law, FT Legal. This is her practice, and she has over 15 years of experience. She's worked with a lot of international businesses. She's one of the leading fintech lawyers as well, in addition to, you know, her corporate and commercial practice, finance, securities regulation. She's also the chairperson for STEP, the Society of Trust and Estate Planners in Barbados. So Tara is listed as one of the most influential women by City Wealth, and she's also known as a pretty like a super lawyer in the Caribbean. So I'd like to welcome our panelists and thank them for joining. We have the question of pivoting businesses. Like, what does this mean? Because there's multiple areas that a business can pivot. So what I'd like to do, Shivonne, is to invite you to kind of outline for us, when we talk about pivoting businesses for this digital economy, what are we speaking about exactly?
Thank you for that, Roland, and thank you for the introduction. So great to be here with all of my other hosts, as well as all of you in the audience. I think that when people hear business pivoting, I think because of our innate experiences with what we think there is, people sometimes have a kind of myopic view of what pivoting can possibly mean. But there are different types of pivoting, and I think that that's what we will definitely be able to describe and elaborate on this presentation today. The first part, first opportunity for a pivot can just be operational, whether you complete your exact and existing line of business, but you just change your location operation. So whereas you may have had a storefront, now under the restrictions that might be related to a curfew, you're now working from home. So you just switch the location of your operation. So that's an operational pivot. There's actually platform pivoting, where perhaps you use a service or an actual product that you would provide, where you've now had to consider moving this from a physical store or a physical location to the very ever-present online platforms. So that would be a platform pivot. You may have to think about pivoting your customers and the database of customers that you use, where your focus, where it might have been existing markets that you had explored. Now we're looking at where are the new customers, or where are the customers that you might need to approach, finding them and making that your new customer base. So that's a customer pivot or shift. The other part of pivoting that I know that a lot of us are now really considering is collaborative pivots, where your business model may have existed in a very streamlined, very linear way, and you were able to execute your service, deal with your supply chains in a very effective way because you had an existing ecosystem. But now, because of constraints, whether it be to access or administration or technology, you have to now find business partners to collaborate with to be able to be as effective as you usually were. And as I said, those areas may be through administration, through technology, and basically even through the customers, et cetera. So the new area of consideration for pivot is actually to collaborate. And so collaborating may be a form of pivoting. For some businesses, pivoting may be a complete new business model. I've had firsthand experience with that. I have a sibling who was in the area of business where he had a car rental company, and now he's had to pivot the vehicles and the services that he had to look at a new revenue stream. So for some people, your business model may have to be re-engineered entirely if you have to look at what the skill set or what your actual productivity opportunities might be within your business, and completely re-engineer the services offered. And then the last thing that some people have particularly understood, you might have to do an asset pivot. So you might actually have equipment or some part of your business model infrastructure that you may have to rent out or make available to a new customer base. Whereas people maybe come in and use your services in situ, you may now have to look at a model to be able to make it available to your customers by daily, weekly, bi-weekly rentals. And that may be an institutional offering that may be new for you, and that is an asset pivot. So those would be the overall overarching opportunities for pivoting businesses this time. So I would say that for most people, this might stimulate some thoughts, because I do know that for many people, the idea of pivoting might have been one direction, but for some, it may have to be a mix of all of the above. So back to you, Roland.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shivonne. So Mykel, from a functional pivot perspective, looking at things like e-commerce, payment gateways, etc. What do you think are some of the opportunities for businesses at the moment, and what challenges have you seen, and how do you think we can solve them using technology?
Right. Thank you, Roland. But I think the region as a whole have been held back because of payment options. In the U.S. and in first world countries, you have things like PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, a lot of money transfer apps and such like that. Not only do they have those apps, but persons are able to access the gig economy using things like Upwork, Odesk, Fiverr, et cetera. But we here in the Caribbean have fallen a little behind in that. And it has not given our population the opportunity to be able to capitalize and tap into that part of the economy. Now that we have this virus, this pandemic, it's actually showing where there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of how people can do what we call a functional pivot. So maybe before you had a taxi service and you were accustomed, getting your riders from the airport, from the port, from the taxi stand, whatever. But now you can't move around like you would have before. Maybe taking your business online, executing an e-commerce platform in order to make payments and stuff. If it's available in your country or region, Barbados is going to be able to have that full functionality. Whether you're a mom and pop restaurant, store, all of these things are ways that small businesses now can try to focus their energies on how to offload some of their income into into these online services, and in order to
Right.
to make
So, Mykel, if you could speak up a little as well, because we just that's better. If you could speak up a little, because we just had a comment in the chat saying that they're not hearing you very well.
Okay.
So you mentioned about payment gateways being a barrier to a functional e-commerce system in Barbados, because ultimately this is something that we've heard about for a while. If you have a digital economy, you need to be able to make digital payments. In order to make digital payments, you need a digital infrastructure that supports those payments. And currently, we have a few options, but none of them are really a perfect solution. So this is like payments alone is a whole nother discussion that we can get into. And what I'd like to do is in this digital economy series is perhaps use one session or two to specifically hone in on that payment situation and what we can do there. In the meantime, what I'd like to do in the chat here is post a link to a survey that the participants can complete. There is a very interesting book called The Digitarian Tsunami, and it was written a few years ago, talking about what we're experiencing right now. Dele Atanda, a Nigerian-born futurist and thought leader for the digital economy, wrote this book. What I'm going to do to 10 people, I'm going to randomly select 10 people who complete this survey, and I'm going to send them this ebook for free. I spoke to Dele last night. He's very excited about what we're doing here. He's also working on a COVID app, and there are actually teams here in Barbados who've been working on COVID apps as well. Barcode, this is Andre Haynes, Shannon Clark, and Dario. These guys have a whole bunch of coders in Barbados who are developing solutions to assist people and for businesses. So that's something that we can look at. What applications are we using right now? Are we developing to help people in this current situation? Mike, do you have any insight on the actual applications now, or maybe web services that can benefit businesses right now?
Well, it's interesting that you said that. I spoke to some of my offshore dev teams in India this morning, and they were letting me know about, they have even apps out there that let the population of their town know how close a COVID patient is when they come into their geographic area, so that they know, to be more mindful, etc. But taking that into consideration, where it comes to this pivot, where we're talking about what can businesses do right now to think about how to pivot, we want to probably look at some examples that could benefit from this. So, say for instance, janitorial services. Right now Barbados is based very heavily on the hospitality industry. None of us are going to restaurants right now. No one is staying at hotels right now. Airbnb, etc. But all of these places need to have regular cleaning done now that we're living in a pretty much post-pandemic era. So applications that can let everybody in the public know when the last time the venue, the vehicle, if it's like a Barbados Light and Power, some type of contractor or whatever, was cleaned, giving them constant updates. These are things that people can start to think about. Not, okay, well, let me just go back to doing my regular customer base that I had for cleaning their houses or whatever. how could I use technology to help me get new business, because now people are going to be looking for additional services when it comes to COVID, and knowing that they're protected, etc. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. And even when we're thinking about businesses, for example, a restaurant that pivots to deliveries, in order to organize those deliveries, you probably want to use some app functionality, right? To organize the timing and so forth. How would you do that, Mike? What do these businesses need to understand in order to get their apps functional?
Well, it'll probably be a three-part. Like, we all noticed what happened a couple of weeks ago when caught off guard here, all the major supermarkets, and a lot of them, unfortunately, did not have a web presence, an e-commerce solution to even be able to take the orders. But it goes a little bit even more beyond that, because they have to integrate those orders into their existing point of sale systems. They have to be able to schedule the orders for preparation inside of their store or some other location. They need logistics in order to get those orders picked up at an appropriate time, and the logistics of actually having them delivered and confirmation of them being delivered, etc. These are problems that have been solved in bigger countries already, Canada, US, etc. But now is the time for Barbados and the region to be looking at these problems being no longer third world problems. We want to move move our economy into a first world economy. Yeah,
because even if you can functionally accept 300 orders for a day for a grocery delivery, can you practically have the assembly line and the store space to get these orders ready? And do you have the delivery systems available so that they can be coordinated and delivered in a timely fashion?
Exactly.
So that's something like, one, you're looking at physical space, but two, you're looking at the technology end to pretty much organize these orders.
If I might jump in, one quick thing that I will
yes, please.
say. One quick thing that I will say in terms of pivoting businesses. I think that one of the things that has happened is that we have had to be reactive. And so for many persons, the information around a curfew or a change in business modalities for most of us in the region was pretty instantaneous. There was no preparation steps towards it. Was very much exactly like in the tip of absolutely there was the preparation to pivot your business was non-existent.
Right.
So what we have seen, and this is one of the areas in terms of collaboration that I would love to see, is that there are certain businesses and certain business models who could figure out logistics, who could figure out supply chains, who could figure out administration. And so people in certain areas, because maybe for capacity or for expediency, they were able to mobilize certain services. So most of us have seen that a lot of businesses have moved towards WhatsApp, or they've moved to Facebook or some other social media platform. So that has been pivot one. Pivot two, and the conversation of what's next and what's the conversation of sustainability, because some territories are seeing a flattening of the curve and some territories are still very much hearing about cases every day. So for them, it is not business as usual and they're not yet seeing where we go. The question about what do we do next is something that people are trying to figure out as the days go by. So I think that in terms of being able to help people understand what they need to do is really, one, understanding what your business needs are, what are the opportunities, and sometimes it takes the time. Like people really do within the business space need to take the time and do a little bit of analysis. And I know that because of the fear and wanting to not lose income, people can sometimes be reactive, but I do recognize that it does take that capacity to sit and actually map out your business and map out collaborations or map out business needs, doing a little bit of research in country to see, are there people who've been able to overcome certain things in my business area? And what are they doing? Can I work with them? Can we have a discussion? And those are some of the proactive things that I would hope to start see that we have happening in this area.
Right, yeah, agreed. Because one of the things you touched on, Shivonne, was the need for these businesses first and foremost to stabilize their business as it is, because everybody got caught with their pants down, you know. And the first step would be for them to stabilize their business, perhaps tighten their belt where it comes to their spending. Obviously, as you said, the supply chain and everything is a little bit up in here right now. But if they can do these initial steps and streamline their business, then they can look at what the technology and then one after that would be to partner with people, and then would be to partner with people that could help them, you know, execute their goals or whatever.
So if I may, guys, those are some really interesting points that you're all raising, and to the point that you've highlighted, or the starting point for our discussion, Shivonne, in terms of pivoting. And there are different types of pivots, as you mentioned. You know, you can actually have an operational pivot where you actually change a business changes the manner of operations. You can have a platform pivot where the business is actually changing its platform for delivery of goods and services. And I think in that context, this is where we're going to see a lot of dynamism and exploration by Caribbean entrepreneurs, because we are traditionally a brick and mortar society, and you know, the digital economy and moving things online, we are taking steps towards that objective, but we're not there, or the level of penetration of use of that platform isn't to the extent as it is in other parts of the world. So I think increasingly we'll be seeing a lot of entrepreneurs seeking to pivot to a digital platform. And with that comes a number of issues that they need to bear in mind from a legal perspective. And I just wanted to kind of highlight some of those, because you know, there are lots of things that we need to keep in mind, lots of moving parts. But one of the main aspects that may not necessarily be obvious to a lot of people is that you're going to start, or you tend to be harvesting a lot of data, in the context of actually supplying your good or service. And there are a lot of obligations that come with that now, because we know about the EU GDPR and its sort of extraterritorial effect for persons who are data controllers or processors within the region. Within our own region, we are seeing legislation being passed in Barbados and the BVI and Cayman, all sorts of jurisdictions. And it is going to be absolutely critical that businesses ensure that they have a framework in place for how they manage that data. They need to ensure that they abide by the principles that govern the processing of that data, ensuring that the data is processed lawfully, fairly, in a transparent manner, ensuring that you only collect as much data as you actually need for the purpose which it is being processed, that it is accurate, obviously that you keep the data safe. And so there are a number of principles that you need to bear in mind in that context when handling people's information. And we all know that data is the new gold, as it were. And there are also other considerations, IP is another very important one, because you're going digital, you're going to the world. You need to make sure that you have your trademark registrations in place. If you have any IP that should be patented, that you actually patent that IP, that you copyright your material as appropriate. And there's another point here, I think, that tends to be underappreciated, but is moving from the periphery to the center. And that's labor issues in the context of the digital economy and the sort of implications of the gig economy, as we sort of colloquially refer to it. How do you treat persons who are connected to your business. And oftentimes, what is done is that they're treated as independent contractors, but are they really independent contractors? You know, are you falling afoul of any, you know, employment statutes, which might actually recharacterize the relationship as one of an employer-employee, especially where there is a significant degree of economic dependence by the person who is providing the service. So there are all sorts of legal issues that you know, entrepreneurs need to bear in mind when pivoting
Absolutely.
to the digital platform.
Yes. So that's a very good point there, especially for entrepreneurs, because when we start to talk about micro, small, medium-sized enterprises, these have been hit the hardest in some cases, and these businesses are needed to come up with solutions to be able to operate in this environment that we're in now. So as an international business lawyer, Tara, what challenges are you currently facing? Are you able to register businesses at the moment? What you know, recommendations do you have for the future and how we can avoid these issues? What have you seen other countries doing? Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that opportunity, Roland. So as you say, in order for our entrepreneurs to successfully transition to the digital economy in the Caribbean, there has to be that supporting infrastructure and framework by the government and government agencies that provide essential support services. So to that extent, you need to have a company set up. You need to interface with the company's registry. We need to look at the extent to which or existing framework for the delivery of services in our government agencies are optimized to service the digital economy. And there is, to my mind, frankly, a significant opportunity for growth in that area because we are not where we need to be in order to support our entrepreneurs adequately. The whole world, I think, was crippled by the immediate onset of COVID, and our leaders who are struggling globally to generate an appropriate response to that. And of course, you know, in the absence of having a lot of information, I think we just wanted to have everyone sit still so we could learn more about the situation and understand it. So yes, we had to have lockdowns. That's fair. That's reasonable. But during the period when we had lockdowns, the response in the business continuity measures across the region were quite different. In some jurisdictions, you know, like ours, for example, many agencies were either shut down completely or they're on very, very, very limited functionality. In other jurisdictions across the region, they went through the same lockdown or are going through the same lockdown that we have gone through, and their agencies were functioning in a highly optimized manner, and they're still able to service their local clients, the local entrepreneurs and international clients in the way that they needed to, and therefore to send and project a message that we are open for business and we can survive in a digital environment. So some jurisdictions, yes, I think have progressed a bit further and they have invested a bit more in that. But I think that's an area that we in Barbados in particular need to spend more time and energy in investing in digitizing our government agencies so that they can adequately support our entrepreneurs in a digital economy, because the two go hand in hand.
Well, I can
absolutely. And before you jump in, Shivonne, we've got one question for Tara there. And I will invite the attendees to ask questions as and when, and we'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. This is the question for you, Tara. Is there a need for special labor laws specifically related to digital workers, or the present labor laws are adequate?
Well, that's a really good question. So our Employment Rights Act in its schedule actually has what I like to term the badges of employment. So it's basically a list of characteristics that a court would look at to construe whether or not there is an employer-employee relationship in place rather than an independent contractor or principal and agent relationship in place. As I say, these things include factors, such as whether the worker is required to give personal and exclusive service, whether the worker is required to deliver the service at a fixed place of business at fixed hours, which wouldn't necessarily happen in the gig economy, but other factors I think that could be relevant include where the worker, their engagement with that person is their primary source of employment, where they're giving most, if not all, of their time to that person, where the worker is subject to the disciplinary and grievance procedures of that particular business. And so there is a whole list of factors that a court would look at to say, well, maybe we should recharacterize these as an employer-employee relationship, but that still might not be adequate. And this is a live issue, as we've seen with, I think, Uber workers around the world, where there are concerns that Uber, doesn't provide sufficient security and safety for the persons who work for them. And I think in time, we will see labor laws evolve to meet the development of the digital economy. But I think for the current purposes and based off the level of penetration of the digital economy in our jurisdiction, perhaps our current statutes might be sufficient for the time being.
Shivonne, please.
Well, I was going to go back to a few points that Tara had made previously. So last year I was consulting for the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, MIST in Barbados. And the whole thrust of the vision of the Prime Minister in Mission 2020, kind of Mission Ease, was it is the vision towards the digital transformation of the service industries within the public sector of Barbados. The projects that I worked on would have been in the areas of, the airport, things like the licenses, some of the online payment structures, etc. So I can say that before we found ourselves in this critical space where we wish to have most of these services executed through online payments, Easy Pay Plus and some of the other platforms were being built out, and the framework, just as Tara suggested, there's one part that is the economic impetus to pivot towards digital transformation. There is the wanton need of the individuals in the communities, whether in the diaspora or localized, but there's also the legal and the safety needs that have to be satisfied to be able to roll out these programs. So sometimes when people are very exhausted in the delays, the reality is that the governments are also trying to ensure that the public's private information is as secure as it can possibly be. So the other side of that conversation is that now that I'm with the IDB, I can post this information in the group chat, but there are a few things that I'm personally executing and working towards. Number one is that I've built out, with a partnership with Connect Americas, we are actually going to have a site for persons who are generally the remote workers or persons who are interested in remote work. We will have a jobs board on Connect America's platform, so I'll put the information on that. And then we will be executing technical assistance grants, because one of the things about this whole conversation about pivoting is that a lot of businesses were not ready for this. And so there was no spare income towards building a website. There was no spare income towards training your workforce to work from home or having the software or hardware needs to work remotely. For many people, that is still a huge deficit that they're facing. So what is necessary is to be able to practically help businesses through the region. OECS and non-OECS is obviously within my remit. So the idea is, how can we execute these technical assistance grants? You'll start to see lots of things we'll be promoting within this month of May, because we are cohesively trying to even pivot the grants that we were executing, because we recognize that the main thrust of understanding of the IDB's infrastructure tends to be large infrastructure projects, but we have to help to support public and private sector needs. So we are looking at some of these digital transformation opportunities through supported technical assistance grants.
So I'm heartened to hear that, and I am myself aware of a number of these initiatives that are currently under play, or into, I should say. But we really have to accelerate the deployment and implementation of these systems in order to, allow and support our entrepreneurs to cope in this environment. And this is connected with, broader business facilitation issues, because the rest of the world is grappling with this as well. And even within our region, some islands are managing this a lot more efficiently than we are. And perhaps we were caught out. They were caught out earlier. I think the islands I've seen that have done this very well, for example, the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands, because of their recent bouts with devastating hurricanes that forced them to address the issue of business continuity head on. So, they actually had remote operations for the private sector and the public sector. It just became, second nature. And we, fortunately haven't had that unfortunate circumstance to force that transition, to a digital platform in the way that it did for other islands. But COVID is now doing that. So COVID is going to be the catalyst to digitization that we need, whether we were ready for it or not. And, I am heartened to say there were other initiatives that we, in the legal community were seeing, for example, moving to an e-filing system with the High Court. And that has been rapidly accelerated because of COVID, because people don't want to handle paper. People aren't going to send people down to the court to file things. They want to have things filed electronically. And all of those programs we're seeing accelerated, but so much more has to be done so that our entrepreneurs can compete with the world.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the experiences that I had firsthand was working with some of the territories post hurricanes 2017 and before that. And they created this catchphrase called Build Back Better. So the responsiveness, and one of the things that I think that all of us have all recognized, is that we need institutional frameworks that support ease of administration as well as process re-engineering that would allow for a two-step, a three-step process towards what all of our business needs, whether it is a new type of insurance policy, whether it is through as Tara said, if you now have to look at ancillary workers or independent contractors to support your business model, how do you fast track all of the systems to keep your business functioning? And I think that that is a tangible requirement in this transformation.
Shivonne, we have a question from an attendee, Kevin Hall. In an ideal world, what do we need right now specifically to help the majority of small businesses?
Well, I'll tell you something that's very interesting, because that is an interesting question. And actually, what I would say is, I know that everybody is probably having a little bit of survey fatigue. However, I would say we actually are administering a survey right now because I personally, I think sometimes, and I say this respectfully, we are very cerebral. And even though we are project planners and strategists, etc., we mind map for all business models. We start to look at the three areas. And as I said, sometimes it's administration, sometimes it's technical needs, sometimes it's a business loan, or in terms of looking at what businesses need right now, we created these pillars of where we felt this is probably what the business needs. So informed information comes from actually asking people. Because for me, sit here and say, everybody needs a loan. They need a bailout loan. They need to be able to pay staff, or et cetera. That's me projecting.
True.
Some people may not need that. They may only need
So Shivonne, if I could ask you to do one thing, that survey that you have, if you could drop it into the chat right now with all the panelists, and Kevin, you can fill that out, and we'll get as many people to fill that out as possible to say what they need, and then we'll get that information. Now, there's some other questions that I want to tap into, and these are coming through the Q&A there. One of them is something very specific to our local musicians and artists, because we have this creative economy. This is stuff that you know, a computer can't do this for you, because we are seeing a lot of automation coming out of the digital economy. But one thing that you don't automate, or you can't automate, is live performances and acts from musicians and music and artists and this type of thing. So Mykel, the question is, how can local musicians and artists tap into digital payments and online distribution platforms? Like what do we have that we can maybe utilize right now, or what would you suggest that we can do? That's a question from Mykel Goldstein.
Yeah, well, I mean, over the years, everybody's been accustomed to your YouTube, your Spotify's, your Vimeos, etc. But as the gentleman asked the question, all of these artists are at home now. Many of them may not have access to studio time, but they can still write material and get it out there. Most of us have been home for about 6 weeks, 2 months. A lot of artists are out there writing music, but one of the hindrances is always going to come back to the payment gateway and the payment vehicle. I mean, I could make as much music as I want, I could make as many apps as I want, but if there's no way for me to get paid for the stuff that I'm doing, that still doesn't make any sense. If it's going to take me weeks in order to register my business, it still doesn't make any sense. They still have to keep the lights on, they still have to pay bills, etc. So there's an opportunity right now from a tech standpoint for a platform to come in to help local and regional artists get their music out that is beyond what the normal YouTubes and stuff like is out there, because we don't want to fall further behind, you know, where this is concerned. There are a couple projects that I'm aware of that's going on right now. One of them is about to partner or do something with some of the artists in Jamaica under Chimney Records. That platform is poised to rival YouTube. And the objective of the platform is to get actual artists that make beats, that make music, for them to get paid a commensurate rate for their contribution and for their digital content than they would traditionally get through Apple. So I'll get more of that somewhere in the chat later, but thank the panelists for this question.
Excellent. And I've got a question that I'll ask to all the panelists here. This is from Jerry Elcott, and he says that one area that I was thinking would be useful in the future is resiliency planning, including operational expenses coverage for a minimum period of, say, 3 months, and business disruption coverage. For example, insurance and where there are no policies, hedging strategies to buffer the impacts of such a disruption. Are you seeing this idea being promoted as a safeguard going forward?
Well, as I said, I'll give an example. If you've lived or have any relatives in any of the territories that were decimated or had the experience of going through the hurricanes of 2017, I would say that usually businesses in the hurricane belt, there was a certain level of contemplation. I think coming out of the experiences of the fact that everybody has recognized that it was such a terrible hurricane season, the idea of resilience came from that. But I absolutely agree. I think that we need to look, and this is the other thing about opportunities for consultants and persons of different levels of expertise. I do think that a lot of businesses do operate with the business as usual. Profitability tends to be the main focus and concern, but it is time for businesses to take a stock of what protection deficits they may have for the actual business itself, its workers, and its business models. So that taps into the things that Tara was talking about. And I do feel like we need to perhaps look at new legislation or maybe new guidelines to execute business in, going forward, because it would help in the advent of a natural disaster or this sort of health-related crises that we're experiencing right now.
Excellent. And this question is for Tara. This is from Fabian Scott. I'm curious to learn in which jurisdictions in the Caribbean have projected that they are open for business or have had satisfactory digital functionality to support the economy.
Oops, Tara's muted.
You need to.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just trying to reduce the feedback. The jurisdictions that I've seen that are doing a really, really good job at this, I would say are the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, and Bermuda. They have, I think, really, really effective business continuity measures in place, which permit remote working to a very, very high degree in both the private and the public sector. And I'm very heartened by the spirit that I saw coming out of a number of our government agencies. I think that people were trying the best that they could in the circumstances, but they just weren't ready institutionally. So that kind of institutional capacity had not yet government agencies in Barbados. Jamaica, remained open to a significant degree, but they weren't under a lockdown, and they are now seeing a significant uptick in, COVID cases because they were not under lockdown. But those are the jurisdictions that I mentioned, particularly the BVI, they were under a lockdown well before we were, but it was and is still seamless. I have colleagues there, and they were literally, and I think more draconian lockdown than we were. They were only able to go on for a long time, 1 day a week for food and shopping and so forth. But in terms of the efficiencies and being able to set up companies and file things at government registries and do things for entrepreneurs and clients, it was seamless. It was like nothing happened. And that was because they had that very, very devastating hurricane a few years ago, which literally flattened the jurisdiction. And so they really had to, cope with things like, ensuring that there is, sufficient, support system for data being stored and accessible in other jurisdictions, and what to do if there's a failure of our telecommunication systems. So they really had to grapple with this challenge to a very, very high degree. What we're dealing with COVID is that you can't come and touch each other. They had to adjust their system because they were dealing with the challenge of a hurricane, which can completely decimate your physical infrastructure. Now, that to me means that COVID is a milder challenge than a hurricane, but it's still a challenge. So because they had to meet that higher threshold, they're moving seamlessly through a period of lockdown because, their continuity measures went above and beyond remote working facility. And as I do say, we do have, government registers that, remain functional, regulators to the extent that they could, but they weren't able to deliver the service seamlessly in the way that they normally would because they just weren't prepared for that. So we need to build that institutional capacity.
Absolutely. Now we have another question from Fabian Scott, and I think this one is very relevant. I don't think that we're going to capture all of this in this discussion, because what I'd like to do is tackle this another week. But I'll give a brief answer for this. Let's look at the question first. How can SMEs and others pivot to digital financing and currency transactions when the developers of digital currencies are operating on proprietary technology, which at this time cannot be regulated because there has not yet been an international standard for digital currencies and financial ledgers that binds them to transparency measures, and B, the proof of concept and regulatory sandbox compliance appears to not be publicly available information. So what I'd like to say on that one, Fabian, is that there is a system that is available, and the central banks are aware of it. It's an open payment network that would cover a lot of these challenges that we're seeing with not having a standard for digital currencies. They need to meet a certain criteria in terms of the compliance and so forth. And there's an API that they will plug into the system. So this pretty much is the solution that we should be using going forward for the banks in the region. In terms of the regulatory sandbox and all those type of things, it has this functionality built into it, and it has recommendations from a regulatory perspective as well. And on that note, what I'd like to do is share my screen. And I'm going to share a presentation. This last year, I think it was June, we had all the ministers of the Caribbean come to Barbados for the 11th ILO meeting, which is the International Labour Organization meeting of Caribbean Ministers of Labour. Can you all see that presentation there?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So within this presentation, and as you can see, it was called The Future of Job Creation and Decent Work in the Digital Economy. We look at where we are now. We're at the fourth industrial revolution. And yes, we have technologies like blockchain with the digital currencies. And we also have, as Tara mentioned, about utilizing data-driven decisions being made. But what I wanted to focus on is the challenges that you experience in this digital transformation and the opportunities that it creates. So yes, we are looking at things like job loss, but then there's the opportunity for job creation, right? And you can get that through retraining. We're going to have to retrain and retool individuals to function in this digital economy, but that gives us the opportunity to be able to innovate. We also have to think about the cultural shift, the challenge of a cultural shift that comes around, because we're so used to doing things on paper, maybe using checks or whatever. But as we said, we have this precedent that's been set by BVI and these other islands, where they're doing everything digitally because they've already experienced similar shocks to their economies like what we're seeing now. So we have the opportunity to be leaders in these areas. So I think a couple of days ago, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, he put forward St. Lucia's thrust into the digital economy, which pretty much covers a whole bunch of areas. So we have a few recommendations here. One, we've been speaking about collaborating, right? We need to collaborate on all different levels. And bear in mind that we need to collaborate within this industry. So right now, we've got tech, finance, we've got legal on this panel alone, and just business in general. And the attendees are from all different industries. So we're actually achieving this right now. But we also need the ministries to collaborate, which they're doing. You also need that public-private collaboration, which we have in Barbados right now through the Jobs and Investment Council. So it's good to see that these recommendations are already taking place. But then we also have to look at the ICT infrastructure. So there's a question in there about ensuring that that one, people have internet, right? We have the infrastructure here, but are you getting cut off because you're unable to pay your bill in a situation like this? This could be devastating for a small business, right? Corporate structures in this digital economy, are we still able to do business? Are we able to set up businesses? Are the entrepreneurs who are coming up with solutions in this environment, are you able to register your business and so forth? So do you have that corporate structure? And then we've been looking at the regulatory side. Do we have everything we need from a legislative perspective as well, right? Now, the other things that we haven't really spoken about in this call, which is something I'd like to look at again, some of these challenges that we'll face, things like cybersecurity, right? So if you're a business that's now digitized, you got to think about, well, what level of cybersecurity do I need? Now, unfortunately, Barbados ranks very low in terms of its, and this is on an international standard in terms of our cybersecurity measures. And there's been a lot of discussion about how we can improve this. I know Neil Hines is one of the people who's been very vocal about this. And there's also Niall in the US. I can't remember, I'm trying to remember, Niall Harper, right? And he actually wrote a paper on this that was submitted. It was an EU paper. He was consulted to take that on. And he actually did an analysis of our cybersecurity and where we need to take it. So maybe that's another digital economy panel that we can have. But we also have the educational aspect to this, right? If we're doing these transformations, and like the PM of St. Lucia said, we're going to need to retrain. So they have a bunch of courses that are now available to the public. Some of them are free, like this is a free webinar, and we're just kind of brainstorming, and it's almost like a think tank in some senses, but we're providing solutions here. And through this collaboration, we'll get more, but we also need specific courses that will retrain and give the skills needed for this digital economy. But also we need to retrain and to do workshops for ministries. So I'm asking this question to the panel now, because I don't want to go on too much, but what recommendations do you have at a country level, at a business level, and an individual level to assist us to cope with this environment that we're in now?
Well, if I
don't all answer at once.
Well, okay, I will say my 2 cents because I think I'm going to be very brief. One of the things that I really like to see us focus on a country level is business facilitation. I think that we really need to focus on improving what it means to get things done in Barbados in a real way. And it's not just a matter of trying to move up the ranks in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, but actually changing it on a fundamental level so that when we actually, say that, it takes X days to incorporate a company, it takes X days to get this license, it takes X day to, facilitate this kind of regulatory compliance, or get this planning from town and country, or get a work permit, or all these things, that it actually gets done within a time frame that meets reasonable international expectations, because we're not competing with ourselves or region, we are competing with the world. So I'd really, really, really like us to see, and it's not a very, I think, high level or sophisticated point, but it's a foundational point in order for us to create the environment for our entrepreneurs to thrive and for the country to thrive. So that's my, my big bugbear on a kind of country jurisdictional level. On a personal level, entrepreneurs, I think that the current time calls for a significant amount of creativity, curiosity, and resilience. You will need to pay attention to what's happening around you within your own shores, outside of your shores, and across the world generally. And you will need to be very agile in identifying opportunities and seizing them, but you will need to be resilient. And so that's going to, I think, have to breed a whole different type of entrepreneur and a cultural mindset where we become highly motivated, very driven, and exceedingly resilient in order to survive the current environment.
Excellent. Shivonne?
Well, I would say following on from Tara, because her points are excellent, I think that one of the things that all of us have noticed probably at different points in time in our life is that there are two sides of being a part of the workforce. Sometimes you are skilled in areas that you may not be able to use on a day-to-day basis because of how opportunities may present. But this time has given people a rise to recognize that, one, they may need to retrain themselves, or two, they may need to look towards making their skills known. Because I do know that one of the things that happens to many of us is that we may have a skill or capacity that it's almost been lying dormant for one reason or the other. And so I think that there's a cooperative kind of understanding that, one, the openness to understand that you may need to use this time to strategically re-educate, retrain, attend the webinars, and activities that will help for your personal development, but 2, also look at the skills that you have and speak up and find opportunities, because I do know that the potential to be able to be active, whether physically, mentally engaged, etc., goes back to what Tara said about being resilient and being agile. It's having the confidence to say, I recognize that I will have to actually have a shift, which you spoke about in the presentation there, Roland, that kind of mental shift to be able to be and accept what you may be moving towards, whether personally or within a business. I think that that is very important. And I think the other side of this space is that we sometimes speak amongst ourselves, whether we have a social group, a WhatsApp group, a network of individuals. I think it's a time for people to start writing things down and creating public voices, because I have recognized, and it's something that most of us in the Caribbean suffer with, all of the great ideas and all of the great foundational concepts sit in a conversation that people have, and now we're all communicating via WhatsApp or some other online platform. Mm-hmm. But we need to aggregate that and come up with a roadmap. And I think that that would be something that, as a tangible way forward, discard some of the emotional disappointments, etc., but that vision of a way forward for a better region, we need to take that from just being conversations amongst friends and make that topics and line items to do.
Absolutely. Fantastic comments there. So can I expect that roadmap by 4 p.m. today? Yeah. So Mykel?
In draft form on G Suite.
Brilliant. Mykel, do you have some comments there?
Well, let me like the same question that Kevin posed earlier. Having a good internet service, whether it be on the mobile or at home, is imperative to any entrepreneur starting any business. I mentioned multiple times before the payments. It doesn't make any sense doing anything if we don't have the payment vehicle. So for me, because that space is what I'm in, those are the 2 things I'm most interested in. After leaving Barbados for 21 years and then coming back last year, it was a shock to find out that there were certain things that we were still lagging behind in, like the payment options, etc. And coming from a startup background myself, I quickly learned within 2-3 months that any ideas that I may have come up with that would help the region or whatever, I had serious barriers to entry. And I talked to other persons that were in the same position as myself that also came home, and they're living here now, but they're working for overseas companies. And when I talked to them about, hey, well, let's do this together, let's come up with this idea, let's try to execute that. Like, it's really hard to do business in Barbados because it's hard to get paid. It's hard to do this. It's hard to do that. So one of those things mentioned in the roadmap from that Shivonne is going to produce by 4 o'clock is going to be how do we move the powers that be to facilitate these 2 very hard pain points for all entrepreneurs. Because unless that happens, then they'll just be ideas around a Domino's table, around a kitchen table.
So we have to be audacious. We have to be audacious.
Exactly. You know what I mean?
Can't be audacious at Domino's.
We have a question here from Sandra at Messiah. Do panelists have any views on proposals that data be treated as a public good?
Sorry, repeat that. Sorry.
Do panelists have any views on proposals that data be treated as a public good?
I think it depends obviously on the type of data. Is she perhaps referring to proprietary technology of some sort that, offers a public good? Then there are questions that will surround, the time that the individual who created it invested in creating it, and how they should be rewarded for that. So I think, as with most things, that there is actually a balancing act that needs to be struck. Obviously, where it comes, I'm assuming she's not referring to personal data that belongs to individuals, because that has to be protected in accordance with data protection principles.
Absolutely.
I mean, okay, so let's look at the question in terms of opportunities, right? So we had to look at almost creating databases of so for example, let's look at it from a perspective of having, if we've gone through a hurricane, you start to share data because you are looking to help and secure the safety of others. So there are instances where there are definitely clauses for making certain things public. But in the instance of what she's asking, I think we need a little bit more clarity, because the information, okay, so we spoke about a little bit just now about internet access, or what is it called? Community-based monitoring in terms of tracking the virus moving. For some people, they don't see these things as a public good. They see these things as intrusive. They see these things as fear-mongering, etc. So the reality is that the argument of the opportunity is also in the use of it. So I know
the type and the use of it.
Correct, because
the type and the use of it.
Digicel and Flow and some of the other providers have indicated that because we have so much online learning now for the students, that they're offering certain services for free, or they're finding a way to zero rate for those persons who may have limited access. So if you go on either of their platforms, you can see different service opportunities for this free service. I think this is now stimulating people to think about building apps and think about recruiting people to create these spaces. And so that kind of data protection is coming out of an idea of good, but how is it being managed and to whom is it serving? So I do think that there's formulaic ways, but you also have to look at things case by case, because the situation can come into areas of gray if it's just spoken about in an esoteric way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mykel, do you have anything to add there?
No, that's fine.
Okay, good. So what other questions do we have? Another question here, which is, and I think this will be the last one because we're coming toward the end, but is there any financing or project facility available for SMEs to employ specialists, particularly operational research, management, science expertise, whom would be able to go into these SMEs and literally put systems in place to allow them to pivot operations, platforms, to allow these SMEs to survive, right?
That's all Shivonne.
Me. So I would say watch this space. We do. I must admit, I mean, as much as people might think this is crazy, we are actually pivoting all of our visions, conversations, grants, and opportunities towards stimulating entrepreneurs, small business experts, to creating those opportunities for this new business model that we will need to be able to execute on. So as I said, there will be from technical assistance areas to corporate venturing opportunities to blockchain innovation grants. Like, we have a wealth of projects that will be announced within the next coming weeks. And actually, to go back to the point that we were speaking about cultural industries, one of the partner organizations, the Caribbean Development Bank, they actually have an open grant right now for creatives in the region. Just by the way, you guys can look this up. It's a CIIF fund. If you had an event and activity that's had to be canceled because of COVID, and you think that there's a way that you might be able to pivot this event and host it online, there is a grant towards that. So a number
Shivonne,
of yes.
Would that include like musicians and
yes,
and
yes,
okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah. Creative.
So that goes to another question, I think, from Mykel Goldstein earlier. Right, excellent. And then we've got a comment from Monique Peters. It says the reason why the BVI could work as they could is because of the international presence and reliance. The local businesses are still behind and struggling. So BVI is open for international business, but local businesses are still struggling there, just like what we're experiencing in the other Caribbean jurisdictions.
And I'd just like to give a shout out to Monique, because Monique is actually a top-notch flying lawyer.
Hi,
in
Monique.
the British
I would like to give a shout out to Monique as well.
So Monique knows very well firsthand, what the experience has been like for the BVI in terms of what it projects. But for me, like, obviously, we need to have functional business continuity measures at all levels. But in terms of what the country as a jurisdiction is projecting to the world and to its international clientele, I think it's exceedingly important, because those clients are a source of this substantial portion of our foreign currency revenue. Like, for example, the international business sector in Barbados generates it's the second highest generator of foreign currency for the country, behind tourism, which is a little known fact. So it's really, really important for us to be able to project to the world that we're still open for business, even as we work to ensure that our domestic framework is functioning the way that it should.
Excellent. So I think we've come to the conclusion here. I would like to thank you, the panelists, for joining. It's been an excellent discussion. This is the first time that we've done this particular series, and I think we've already had some requests to do some more. So we'll likely continue this digital economy series. I'd like to hand over to Marjorie. Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, Professor Robinson and Dr. Aaron Wallace from the Sagicor Cahill School of Business and Management.
Thank you very much, Roland. You're absolutely correct. We had a very good discussion today, and we definitely are exploring moving forward with a bigger discussion about digital economy, transitioning, and so on. For all of you in the chat, you'll note that there were several references made to information you can access. Please feel free, reach out as well to our panelists. They have indicated that they are all available for you to get in touch with them on LinkedIn. So make the connection, follow up, and keep the conversation going. Thank you all very much for joining us today. As you know, our topic has been digital economy, strategies for pivoting businesses. Our panelists have been Shivonne Johnson, Tara Frater, Mykel Douglas, and our moderator was Roland Haggins. For more information on the Sagicor Cahill School of Business or our programs, please feel free to visit our website, uwichsb.org. Keep the conversation going on our Facebook page. Reach out to us for any additional information that you need or clarification. Hopefully, you'll also be able to join us next week when we will be discussing psychological health in the workplace. We will also make sure you know, so you can look out for our future episodes talking about digital economies. I look forward to seeing you then. Stay safe, stay sane, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Here at the Sagicor Cahill School of Business and Management, located at the University of the West Indies Cahill campus, we meet the needs of the upwardly mobile professionals. Our business school functions in an evolving global space where the need to have that competitive edge distinguishes you as a professional. Our academic curriculum offers a variety of programs that gives you that edge. We offer our students a doctorate in business administration. Then, there's our executive masters in business administration. Our Sagicor Cahill School of Business and Management is for you. Enroll now.